Hobbit pre-release is this weekend, and I have developed a brand new way of looking at cards that are about to be released and predicting how good they're going to be. Before a set comes out, it can be really useful to have a sense for which cards are likely to be good. Now, you've probably seen videos where people go card by card and try to predict how good they'll be, and I love watching those videos as well. But for the most part, it involves making a subjective judgment call about how you think the card is going to play out in the set. The point of my channel is to use data for all of us to get better at limited together. So I wanted to focus on what exactly we concretely know based on the recent history of Magic about how a card is likely to play out. So here is my 3-step method. First, I take one of the previewed cards and I'm going to identify similar cards. I take the range and average of the grades for similar cards in the past based on win rate data. And then I do some thinking. No card is exactly going to play out like its closest sibling did in the past, so we have to fudge a little. Some of the results might surprise you, as cards that look powerful and promising on paper resemble cards that have just played out really badly in the past. So let me get situated in my Magic card here. Perfect. And now I'll show you how this plays out in a real example. So Dwarven Provisioner is a 2/2 for 1 and a white. And by the way, if you want to listen to this audio only, I'm going to read every single card that I talk about. So if you can hold a lot of information in your head, you can actually do the dishes or go for a bike ride and listen to this. It'll be possible. Okay, so we're looking at a 2/2 for 1 and a white Dwarf Citizen. And for 3 and a white, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Dwarven Provisioner is actually a functional reprint of a card that we've seen before, Warren Elder. The exact same card, a 2/2 for 2 that for 4 can buff all of your creatures +1/+1. But that one was a Rabbit Citizen from Bloomborough. That card got a C. Okay, hold up. What does C mean here? Specifically, C is a game in hand win rate from 17lands.com. It reflects the probability that a player who used the 17 Lands client to track their drafts went on to win a draft game after drawing Warren Elder into their hand. In Warren Elder's case, 55.5% of the time that someone drew it, they went on to win the game if they were a 17 Lands user. 17 Lands classifies those probabilities into letter grades, so 55.5 is basically the middle of the pack. If you're curious about why that is, I'll link a video in the description where I talk a lot more about these data. But this means that Warren Elder in online draft is a very middle-of-the-road quality card in its set. Also, for finding similar cards, Scryfall and Ether Search were super useful, so thanks to both of those sites. Okay, back to the example. So we saw that Dwarven Provisioner is a functional reprint of a card that already got a C. It's also very similar to this card, Timid Shieldbearer, which was a 2/2 for 1 and a white. And for 4 and a white, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So it's the same exact card, except it costs an extra generic mana to buff your team. That card also got a C in Lorwyn. And it's also a variation on this idea from Avatar, a Water Tribe Captain, which was a 3/3 for 3. And for 5 generic mana, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So Dwarven Provisioner comes out quicker. They both have a square stat line, appropriate stats. Dwarven Provisioner is cheaper, so probably a better card, but Water Tribe Captain also got a C. Okay, so what are we going to do with this information? So we looked at n equals 3 examples that were similar. The minimum grade that we saw was a C. The maximum grade that we saw was a C. The median grade that we saw was a C. So I think you guys, Dwarven Provisioner might turn out to be a C. In this video, I'm going to grade every white, common, or uncommon in The Hobbit. Tomorrow I'll do blue commons and uncommons, and next day I'll do black, and so on. I just want to call out a few caveats, let's say, about the method. First of all, I recognize by classifying cards compared to individual other cards in the past, we're missing some very important things. Number one, the synergies between cards obviously matters enormously. It's very hard to capture that in set predictions, but I'll try to do this in the kind of thinking step after averaging the grades to try to take into consideration other cards I've seen and how things might play out. Also, color pair strength means I'll make correlated errors. If white is really good, maybe Dwarven Provisioner turns out to be really good. Number two, I'm specifically predicting 17 lands game in hand win rate. So these claims may or may not apply to your pod draft at Friday Night Magic or at the Pro Tour. I'm not thinking about sideboard card strength. I'm taking 17 lands win rate as an input, so the output should be thought of as the expected 17 lands win rate of the card in best of 1 Premier Draft Online. Finally, obviously where I draw the boundaries, what I consider to be a similar enough card is subjective, and there's a subjective step at the end. So if you did this method, you might get slightly different values. Part of the fun is arguing about which cards are similar, and if I missed an even more similar card, super encourage that and would love to hear it in the comments. Also, I'm focusing on commons and uncommons for 3 reasons. Number 1, rares are much less similar to other previous cards, so I think the method is much less applicable there. Number 2, rares are rare. When you sit down at your pre-release pool, you're going to have tons and tons and tons of the cards that I'm talking about in these videos. You're only going to have a few rares, so it's actually much more helpful to talk about commons and uncommons. Number 3, you should just experiment with the rares in a set. Predicting the strength of commons, I think, is more important. Rares and mythics, like, play with them once. All right, let's get rating for real. Okay. So the next card, and we're just going alphabetically through the white commons, Dwarven Shortsword, 3 and a white for an equipment. When it enters, you make a 2/2 red dwarf creature token, then attach this equipment to it. Equip creature gets +1/+2, and then the equipment has an equip cost of 2, so you can move it over and give something else +1/+2. This reminds me of a few things that we've seen in the past. First of all, it looks, actually, let's talk first about the ability for Mirrodin. It looks a lot like for Mirrodin from Phyrexia All Will Be One. So I'm using the example here of Volshock Splitter, 3 and a red for an artifact. With for Mirrodin, when this equipment enters the battlefield, make a 2/2 red rebel creature token. Equip creature gets +2/+0, and equip cost of 2 and a red. So you'll see how I'm making this comparison. Both of them make a 2/2 on entry and immediately get equipped. In terms of stats, these both cost 4 mana. The Volshock Splitter effectively makes a 4/2, and you can re-equip it for 3. Dwarven Shortsword makes a 3/4, and you can re-equip it for 2. So Dwarven Shortsword is slightly less aggressive, but you are getting more sum total stats for your money, and the re-equip cost is substantially less, a whole colored pip less. Volshock Splitter was a C+. I do think Dwarven Shortsword maybe is slightly better in a vacuum, although it's going to be worse in an aggressive deck. But having your 4-mana creature trade down for a 2/2 is really bad. I will also say, though, red-green aggro oil counters was the best deck in Phyrexia All Will Be One draft. So Dwarven Shortsword may be better on paper, but it would have to be in the best archetype to be better in context. The other comparison I wanted to draw is Warrior's Sword from Final Fantasy, 3 and a red for an artifact, Job Select. When it enters, make a 1/1 colorless hero. Equip creature gets +3/+2 and is a warrior in addition to its other types. So Warrior's Sword was a 4/3 for 4 instead of a 3/4 for 4. And it had a re-equip cost of 5. Now, I will say in Final Fantasy, Warrior's Sword, it both played out pretty well, and I did actually re-equip it pretty often. And that was a very balanced format. So this one did not have the benefit of being in the best archetype, and it got a C in that set. So with 2 comparison points, we have a minimum of C, a maximum of C. The median is either a maximum of C+, so the median is either C or C+. But to be quite honest, I actually think Dwarven Shortsword is just worse. Like, you can imagine paying the equip cost of 2 and sticking it on a flyer or something like that. There aren't that many flyers, especially in white, especially cheap ones, and giving a flyer +1 is way worse than giving it +2, for example. This card, like, lines up really weirdly. A 3/4 for 4 is a pretty bad stat line. The equip cost of 2 kind of helps, but +1/+2 is not that big of a bonus anyways. So I'm leaning C-. I might even be inclined to give it a D+. I'm basically just taking the performance of the similar cards that I think are better and benefited a little bit from the context and knocking like a decent chunk off. So C-, I wouldn't be surprised if it falls into the D+ range. Next up, Esgaroth Garrison. And by the way, if you like what I'm doing here, make sure you're subscribed to my channel on YouTube. We're going to have 4 more videos like this for blue, black, green, and red, and probably also do a colorless and multicolored one. I'm going to be releasing them about 1 a day through the weekend. But if you want access to them early, members of my channel do also get early access to new videos. I'm not done all of them yet, but I'm going to be giving them to members as soon as I finish each one, which for the last ones will be several days early and might mean that you have access to all of the colors before you go to pre-release. So if you're already subscribed, consider joining as a member. Okay, back to Esgaroth Garrison. So this is a *5 for 4 and a white human soldier. Esgaroth Garrison's power is equal to the number of creatures you control. When this creature enters, recruit. Okay, so we have to explain recruit. Recruit is a lot like Connive. You draw a card, then you discard a card. And if you discarded a non-land card, you make a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So draw a card, discard a card. If it's a non-land, you make a 1/1. It's just like Connive, except you make a 1/1 instead of putting a +1/+1 counter on the creature. So I actually think it's, I won't say strictly better than Connive, but better. So Esgaroth Garrison, you could think of it as at pretty much at minimum, it's a 2/5 for 5 where you get to loot on entry and make a 1/1. So kind of 3/6 worth of stats for 5. This is a brand new mechanic. So we have our first challenge of finding a comparison card for a new mechanic. Okay, so the first thing that this made me think of was Suki Kyoshi Warrior from Avatar. This was a star 4 for 2 and 2 Selesnya hybrid. So star 4 for 4 instead of a star 5 for 5. And Suki said its power is equal to the number of creatures you control. When it attacks, make a 1/1 white ally that's tapped and attacking. In my view, Esgaroth Garrison is better than Suki. I mean, you are paying more. It does cost a whole extra mana, but the effect is more powerful. When it enters recruit is a lot better than when it attacks, make a 1/1. The ceiling on attacking and making a 1/1 is higher because you can just keep doing it in theory, but that's not really how limited works. Getting the thing to happen immediately is usually better than waiting until you have to attack to get the thing. So Suki and Avatar ended up being a C. There's another recent card that this made me think of a lot. Again, not a perfect comparison because it's a brand new mechanic, but this is what it was reminiscent of for me. AIM Scientist from Marvel. That was a 3/3 for 3 and a blue human scientist villain. So I don't know exactly how relevant the creature types are in The Hobbit, but if anything is a relevant creature type, I think they share that trait, as did Suki. And AIM Scientist, 3/3 for 4, when it enters, it connives. So you can see why it made me think of that. The on-entry connive, on-entry recruit. There are not that many on-entry connive cards ever, maybe about a dozen. AIM Scientist is the most recent one. And AIM Scientist also had basic land cycling for 2. So that probably makes it a lot better. But it got a C+. So we saw 2 cards. The minimum was C, the maximum was C+, the median C or C+. I'm not super impressed by Esgaroth Garrison. I think recruit is really strong. I think that's a really strong ability. Effectively getting 3/6 of stats for 5 is not terrible. So I don't think that we're in D level territory. Like anytime you're making 2 pieces of cardboard, you have to be okay with it. Having said that, in the 5-drop slot in limited, I'm usually wanting like rares. Like the number of commons that are this pricey that end up being worth having in your deck that much is really low. So I was kind of once again, between D+ and C-. I went for C- because I'm pretty bullish on the strength of recruit. If this falls even down to D, I won't be surprised. I would be really surprised if it ends up being like, I don't know, like a C+ or B-. Maybe C+ wouldn't be shocking to me, but I'm leaning like D+ C- kind of territory here. Taking what we've seen in the past and saying, you know, adding that extra mana, I think bumps it down a lot. Okay, now for a juicy one. Lake Town Lookout. A 1/1 for 1 human scout. When it dies, recruit. Okay, so again, we have this brand new mechanic. What are we going to make of it? I took a deep dive on this card into cards in the past that resemble the broad template of a 1/1 that when it dies, you do one of 2 things. Recruit has 2 pieces to it. There's a card, not exactly card advantage, but card selection element. I get to shape my hand a little bit, maybe get rid of an extra land or something. The other element is I can make a 1/1 if I really need to. So that's actually a type of 1/1 that we've seen a lot. A 1/1 for 1 that dies into a 1/1. So a classic example is Infestation Sage, a 1/1 for 1 black. When it dies, make a 1/1 black and green insect creature token with flying. When possible, I'm really going to favor cards from Foundations because these, in my view, it's such a low synergy environment and a pretty balanced format. It means that these kind of reflect how good the basic template is, much better than in a really high synergy format like, I don't know, Secrets of Strixhaven. However, Infestation Sage, I think, is a lot better than what Lake Town Lookout is offering. Again, I do think Recruit is really strong, but Infestation Sage had 2 big things going for it. Number 1, it dies into a 1/1 that has flying, which is a really big part of it. Flying was really good in that set. Number 2, the sacrifice cards in that set were actually really pushed. So sacking Infestation Sage was really nice. So with all that said, it was a B- in that format. I would say this is like the realistic ceiling on how good a card like this ends up being. Another example from Outlaws of Thunder Junction is Nezumi Linkbreaker, a 1/1 for 1 black. When it dies, make a 1/1 red mercenary creature token with tap. Target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. Okay, so a 1/1 for 1 that dies into like the set, one of the things of the set, which was these mercenary tokens. And the mercenary tokens were synergistic. The sacrifice thing was synergistic as well. Nezumi Linkbreaker ended up being a C+. Crawling Chorus, it actually like makes me a little annoyed to even talk about this card because of how punishing the Toxic deck was in Phyrexian All Will Be One. But this was a 1/1 for 1 with Toxic 1, so when it deals combat damage to a player, they get a poison counter. When it dies, you make a 1/1 Phyrexian Might that also has Toxic 1 and it can't block. So this is another 1/1 for 1 that dies into the 1/1 thing of the set. Crawling Chorus was a B-, absolute ultimate groan test, as Limited Resources calls it, of not just the format, but for me of all time. When I think about annoying cards to see early in the game, Crawling Chorus is the top of my list. So again, right at the ceiling of how good this kind of card can be, in my opinion. Okay, from Wilds of Eldraine, Harried Spearguard was a 1/1 for 1 red haste. When it dies, make a 1/1 black rat creature token with this creature can't block. This one was also a C+. Nesting Bot from Either Drift, a 1/1 for 1 start your engines, which was the whole speed thing of the set that I'm not going to get into. When it dies, make a 1/1 colorless servo, and at max speed it gets +1/+0. This one was also a C+. I think Nesting Bot is a much more fair comparison than some of these other ones. Note that like Harried Spearguard has haste, Crawling Chorus, and Infestation Sage are kind of pushed to be as good as they can get. So the ones Nezumi Linkbreaker and Nesting Bot, the ones that are closer to a fair 1/1 for 1 that does something closely related to the set, recruit, start your engines, make a mercenary, these ones have clocked in at C+. Okay, then there's another direction that you can take this, which is you don't usually get 1/1 for 1s that die into an entire card, like when it dies, draw a card. But Lake Town Lookout doesn't do that either. It dies into a part of a card, some kind of card advantage, potential card advantage or card selection. And that's actually another genre of 1/1 for 1 that we've seen. So we're going to look at a few of these. And by the way, did I mention this video is for nerds who like Magic cards? We're going to keep it moving, but I recommend that you buckle up. We're going to get a good sense of how good these cards are in this video. Okay, so the first type of this genre is 1/1s that could potentially kill a small creature on the other side of the battlefield. That's a conditional kind of card advantage. You actually do get an entire card out of it, but only if they have something small on the other side. So this is Bilevile Boggart, a 1/1 for 1 black. When it dies, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature from Lorwyn. It was a D, but it was way dragged down by goblins being, at least online, the by far the worst archetype in that format. A much better example, Cacophony Scamp, a 1/1 for 1 red. When it deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice it. If you do Proliferate, when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. From Phyrexian All Will Be One. B-, but again, red aggro was the best deck in that format. Callous Inspector, a 1/1 for 1 black. It has Menace. When it dies, it deals 1 damage to you and you make a clue. I actually loved this card, so I was disappointed when it was only a C. I think it wasn't super supported in the format. But when it dies, create a clue is a lot closer to when it dies, recruit. Kind of gives you a card back, but you have to invest more to get that card. You have to pay the 2 to sack the clue. Clockwork Percussionist, a lot closer to a full card, a 1/1 for 1 red. Haste, when it dies, exile the top card of your library. You may play it until the end of your next turn. That was a full C+ in Duskmourn. Back to the conditional card advantage if you can kill something small. We have Dynamite Diver, 1/1 for 1 red. Goblin Pilot, from Either Drifted, saddles, mounts, and cruise vehicles as though its power were 2 greater, which turned out not to be super important because it's kind of off color. When it dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. That was a D+, I think, because it was at cross purposes with the color. Another one from Duskmourn, Fear of Lost Teeth, a 1/1 for 1 black. When it dies, it deals 1 damage to any target and you gain 1 life. That was a C-. Greedy Freebooter from LCI, a 1/1 for 1. When it dies, scry 1 and make a treasure, a lot closer to recruit. I actually think this is a really close comparison for Lake Town Lookout. That was a D+, unfortunately. And then I have to include the Lord of the Rings example, Rohirrim Lancer, a 1/1 for 1 red menace. When it dies, the ring tempts you. Again, I won't get into that, but the ring tempts you was a really important thing to start triggering, and it turned into card advantage very quickly. Ring tempting level 2 was looting, which is a lot like recruiting. That one was a C+. It was kind of right on the border of B-. I think in the early format, it was a B- for a long time, I'm pretty sure. And then honorable mention to Curious Farm Animals from Avatar, a 1/1 for 1. When it dies, you gain 3 life, but you can sack it to destroy an artifact or enchantment. Not exactly card advantage, but you can trade it for a card on death. That was a C-. Okay, we looked at 14 cards. That's the most we'll look at for any card, I swear. I picked fewer examples after this one. But this one was so interesting because it's our first engagement with a card that has a recruit and otherwise really closely resembles a lot of cards that haven't had recruit. So it can really start giving us a fine sense for how good a recruit is. Okay, so minimum was a D. The maximum was a B-. The median was a C+. Now the D was exceptional. That was Bilevile Boggart, which was in a terrible archetype. The B- was exceptional in the other direction. Infestation Sage and Crawling Chorus are just the absolute best this type of card will ever get. So we saw that in order for this card to be a B-, basically it would have to fit into the best or like second best archetype and be synergistic and useful in that archetype. That's what both Infestation Sage and Crawling Chorus were. In order to fall down into the D range, it pretty much has to be in like the worst archetype, or maybe recruit has to be way worse than we think it is. But much more commonly, this type of card is just a C+. It's a good card to pick up. You're actively happy to have it in your deck, but it's not a card where you pack one, pick one it, and you're pleased. Not like Elite Interceptor or something. It's not that type of common one drop. So I'm just gonna put it solidly at C+. I think I'm actually pretty confident in this one. Something I do want to call out is that the more different cards from different archetypes I bring in, the more I think the central tendency is going to be in the middle of the grade distribution, closer to C and C+. That's actually just the nature of the beast. So after this, I'm going to be more disciplined about picking and choosing like 2 to 4 examples per card and try to have them be artfully arranged to have independent pros and cons. If you're a statistician, don't at me. There's a big asterisk on what I just said about central tendency. Okay, now another new card, Magnificent End, 4 and a white for an instant. This spell costs 3 less to cast. If it targets a tapped creature, Magnificent End deals 5 damage to target creature. So this is a really interesting card. It looks so basic, but it's actually so deep. So first of all, just talking about what the card does. So for 5 mana, you can deal 5 damage to something, to a creature. If the creature is tapped, then it costs 2 mana to deal 5 damage to it. So there's a first category of card, which is instants that deal damage with a conditional discount. I mean, Knocking Blow from Streets of New Capenna is one example. It costs 1 less. Sorry, it's 2 and a white for an instant. It costs 2 less if it targets a red creature, but it deals 4 damage to an attacking or blocking creature and you gain 2. I'm not going to parse all the differences. It's a pretty different card, but that one was actually a B- in SNC. Then from the most recent Modern Horizons, we have Ghostfire Slice, 2 and a red for an instant. It costs 2 less if an opponent controls a multicolor permanent. It deals 4 damage to any target. That one was a C+, but a much more flexible discount. I just want to set that baseline. A much more similar category is these white instants that they've printed recently that deal damage to a tapped or attacking creature. So Razor Rings is one example from Avatar, 1 and a white for an instant. It deals 4 damage to an attacking or blocking creature, and irrelevantly, in almost every case I ever saw, you gain life equal to the excess damage dealt this way. That was a C, not a good card, not a bad card. So the difference is it was 1 less mana, or sorry, 1 less damage for the same amount of mana. You pay 2 mana to deal 4 damage. In Magnificent End, you can pay 2 mana on the discount to deal 5 damage. But importantly, Magnificent End, first, it targets a tapped creature instead of an attacking or blocking creature, right? That's a lot narrower. An attacking creature with Vigilance won't get hit, and a blocking creature usually won't be tapped. I mean, will never be tapped. However, Magnificent End has this other mode that you don't have to pay it on the discount. You could just spend 5 mana to deal 5 damage to something. Razor Rings literally cannot target something unless it's tapped or attacking or blocking, I mean. Okay, similarly, there was Sonar Strike, 1 and a white for an instant, 4 damage to an attacking, blocking, or tapped creature. You gain 3 if you control a bat. This was from Bloomborough. It was also a C. There's a bunch more of this kind of spell. They typically cost a little more, cost a little less, like Helicarrier Strike from Marvel. They typically ring in around C. Okay, then there's another third genre of card that I want to pull in. Destroy and destroy target creature, and you get a discount if it's tapped or attacking or something like that. We've seen a lot of these recently. I'll tick through them quickly. Grounded for Life from Ninja Turtles, 4 and a white for an instant, costs 3 less to cast if it targets a tapped creature, destroy target creature. Okay, that one was a C- in Ninja Turtles. Ajani's Response in Secrets of Strixhaven, 5 mana, destroy target creature, but it's 2 mana if the thing is tapped. Very good card. That was a B-. White aggro was the best deck in Secrets of Strixhaven, so this was about as good as this effect gets. Luminous Rebuke from Foundations, another fantastic limited card. 5 mana, destroy target creature, costs 3 less if that thing is tapped. Also rang in at a B-. Quicksand Whirlpool LCI, a bit overcosted. It was 6 mana to exile target creature. It costs 3 less to cast if it targets a tapped creature, so 3 to exile if the thing is tapped. It was a C+, because in LCI, a lot of the things that would kill you only cost 1 mana, and they were little flyers wearing an equipment, and you didn't want to sink 6 mana because a lot of them had vigilance into exiling them. But still, even in that context, it was pretty solid. Of course, we have to include a Lord of the Rings example, Banished from Edoras, 4 and a white, exile target creature, 2 less if that thing is tapped. That was a C-. Then we also had Fate of the Suncrist in Final Fantasy, 5 mana, destroy target non-land permanent, 3 mana if the thing is tapped. That was a C-. Okay, and last one, I hope this has been meditative for you. Ride's End, 5 mana for an instant, exile a creature or vehicle, and it's 2 mana if the thing is tapped. That was a B-. So a really good version of this card. Also a set where white was on top. Okay, so what do we make of Magnificent End? We just saw 11 examples. Deal damage with a discount, deal damage to a creature in combat, and destroy something with a discount. All of those across those types, they range from a minimum score of C-. None of those cards that we looked at had lower than a C- score. The highest, though, was B-, so it was never like a phenomenal card. The median was C+. So what do we think about this? Okay, 5 mana, deal 5. 2 mana, deal 5 to something that's tapped. There's no way it's going to be bad, right? I don't think. So it's definitely worse than the Ajani's Response style of card. It's pretty much strictly worse than Ajani's Response, something that just destroys, straight up destroys. Some amount of the time, this is not going to kill the thing that you need to kill. Most of the time, it's going to function more like a Razor Rings, 2 mana to kill an attacking creature. The fact that it targets a tapped creature means that it fits better in defense. By the way, I'm actually picking up a vibe that white is not the most defensively slanted. We have a lot of these, I don't know, like a 3/4 for 4, a 1/1 that does something when it dies, not on entry, or as a static ability. Now we have something that kills a tapped creature better than it kills a blocking creature. These are defensive types of cards, right? So just flagging that. All of these are reasons for me to be a little bit more pessimistic about it. But again, it's not going to be bad. So I think it's towards the low end, but not the lowest end of this type of card that we've ever seen. I'm guessing it's going to be a C. I would be much more surprised if it's a B- than if it's like a C-. Okay, up next we have Moment of Glory, the moment when Bard slays the dragon. So this is 1 white for a sorcery. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. If this spell was cast from a graveyard, also put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control. And as you might have guessed, that is related to a flashback ability, so you can flash it back for 4 and a white. Okay, so you play it once as a sorcery, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, then you flash it back for 5, and you buff your whole team by 1. Well, my first thought was, welcome back, practiced offense. Obviously, that is an exaggeration. But we have seen a good number of cards like this recently. So first, I want to draw the obligatory comparison to another Lord of the Rings card, Now for Wrath, Now for Ruin, which was 3 and a white for a sorcery. Put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, so just the flashback mode of a Moment of Glory. Then those creatures gain vigilance until end of turn, and the ring tempts you. I definitely think Moment of Glory is better than Now for Wrath, Now for Ruin. The first mode is much cheaper, so you get the +1/+1 counter for just 1 mana up front. The second mode is also cheaper. It costs 4 mana to buff your team instead of 5. Sorry, scratch that. I have it backwards. The second mode is more expensive. It costs 5 mana instead of 4. So Moment of Glory, the flashback to buff your whole team, is more expensive than Now for Wrath, Now for Ruin. Also, Now for Wrath, Now for Ruin gives vigilance and ring tempting. I just don't think ring tempting was that big a deal on turn 4 a lot of the time. You wanted to do it earlier. And vigilance when you're buffing your whole team, not the most useful, because buffing your whole team is kind of an alpha strike, like highly aggro thing to do. So you're not really thinking about blockers that much in that situation, I don't think. So putting all of that together, Now for Wrath, Now for Ruin was a D, but I would definitely have higher hopes for Moment of Glory. This feels like a tweaked version to make Now for Wrath, Now for Ruin better for the Lord of the Rings sequel set or prequel set. Okay, and you can see that they've been playing around with this kind of card recently. Actually, we saw two very similar cards in Secrets of Strixhaven. So one was Dig Site Inventory, also 1 white for a sorcery, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. This one gives that creature vigilance until end of turn. Then the flashback mode was just 1 white. That card rang in at a C. Now, white aggro was the best thing to be doing online in Premier Draft in Secrets of Strixhaven. Silver Quill and Lorehold were like actually the two best decks, better than the famous soup deck. And this was synergistic with both of the best decks. Silver Quill wanted you to target creatures, and Lorehold wanted you to pull things out of your graveyard. So the fact that it only got a C in that context actually does tell you something. It definitely had the benefit of being a synergistic piece in both of the best color pairs, and still it only managed to C. Then even worse, we saw this card Daydream, which, by the way, I think is very beautiful design. I think it really wonderfully captures the idea of a daydream. But anyways, not a good limited card, though. So 1 white for a sorcery, exile a creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it, and then flashback for 2 and a white. Another variation on this idea, but this one was straight up unplayable in Premier Draft. It was like the only cheap white card in the format that was bad. Okay, so putting all this together, we just looked at 3 cards. The worst was an F, the best was a C, the median was a D. I do think this one's better than Now for Wrath, Now for Ruin, because it comes out faster. I think it's likely to play out worse than Dig Site Inventory, because as we discussed, Dig Site Inventory had everything in the format lining up well for it, and still only achieved a C. So I think C is kind of the cap on this type of card. Although buffing your whole team for 5, is that better than buffing one thing for 1? Nah, feels kind of the same in terms of power level. Like, 1 is too much to pay to buff one thing. 5 is also overpriced to buff your team, probably. So anyways, I'm landing around like D+. I don't think this is a very impressive card. Could be wrong, but in the past, it's not been impressive. All right, here's actually a more unique one than what we've seen before, and it has a new mechanic on it. Ori, Keeper of Songs, a 3/3 for 2 and a white. Legendary creature, Dwarf Bard. It has Storied. If you control 3 or more artifacts, legendaries, and or sagas, you have an enduring story for the rest of the game. So artifacts, legendaries, and sagas. And then as long as you have an enduring story, Ori gets +1/+0 in vigilance. So there are a lot of legendary creatures in the format to help you get the legends part of that. Artifacts, there are tons of equipment running around in white and red, and there are a decent number of sagas as well. So I don't see it as too implausible that you can get story online pretty consistently and limited. This is not like it's just a commander thing or anything. So basically it's a 3/3. So we've never seen a storied card before, right? There was this historic mechanic in Dominaria. So we saw cards like Davenant Trapper. When you cast a historic spell, tap target permanent and opponent controls. It was a 3/2 for 3. And that's the same batching of cards, artifacts, legendaries, and sagas. I'm not comparing Ori and Davenant Trapper, though. I'm drawing this comparison between storied and historic. But looking through the card file from cards that had historic on them, I just don't really see any that I really want to compare to Ori. What I think is more informative for thinking about Ori is like, it's a 3/3 for 3 where you have to jump through maybe a pretty doable hoop, and then it becomes a 4/3 vigilance. So 3/3 for 3, put in some work, and it gets an extra power, maybe an extra static, like evergreen keyword ability. Okay, so I'm going to look at some recent cards that match that template. Number 1, as I said before, I always like to kind of default to MTG Foundations to understand card strength in a vacuum. And there we had Beastkin Ranger, a 3/3 for 2 and a green for an elf ranger with trample. Whenever another creature you control enters, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. These are like similar genres of cards. You see what I'm saying? Beastkin, both 3/3 for 3. Beastkin Ranger has trample all the time, or you can gain vigilance. If you do a thing that you're probably going to be trying to do anyways, Beastkin Ranger becomes a 4/3, or it could even become like a 5/3, 6/3. So maybe it's a little bit better in that way. But Ori, if you do a thing that you're trying to do anyways, it becomes a 4/3. Okay, so Beastkin Ranger was a C+ in that format. Crossroads Watcher is like the same exact card as Beastkin Ranger. It was just printed in Lorwyn. It had a more relevant creature type, I guess. In Lorwyn, that card played out as a C. From Brothers War, we also had Perimeter Patrol, a 3/3 for 2 and a green. When an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. And that one played out also as a C. I'm going to call these kind of the peer group for Ori. We haven't really seen this genre of card in white in the last few years, but I think these are more similar than the most similar white cards I could find. So I found 3 similar cards, minimum of C, maximum of C, minimum of C, maximum of C+, median was C. I'm just going to go in expecting Ori to be a C as well. I think I would be more surprised to see it at C+ than C-. I think if anything, I'm expecting I'm overrating this card. All right, next up, Thorin's Last Stand, 2 and 2 white for an instant. Totally awesome to see this captured in a Magic card, by the way. I don't know, for anyone who was tired of me griping about Marvel, because that's not my thing, here's my cred that here's my like extremely beat up Lord of the Rings box set and my Hobbit book that's like quite messed up from the times that I have read it. So I definitely am the target audience for this particular crossover. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I like Lord of the Rings much more than The Hobbit, actually. I read a bunch of P.G. Wodehouse after reading Lord of the Rings and before reading The Hobbit. And then especially like the first chapter of The Hobbit or so, it really felt to me, I immediately recognized the genre. And I know Tolkien was like in part of inventing modern fantasy, but immediately I was like, this isn't fantasy to me so much as British class comedy. Like a bunch of those first silly sentences from the first chapter of The Hobbit could just as easily have appeared in Jeeves and Worcester and not seemed out of place. Okay, but that's neither here nor there. So Thorin's Last Stand, 2 and 2 white for an instant. Choose one. Creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. Or you can destroy target artifact or enchantment and you gain 2 life. So as highly literary cultured Magic players will immediately recognize Inspired Charge as the inspiration for Thorin's Last Stand. The art even looks super similar. 2 and 2 white for an instant. Creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. So this is mode 1 of Thorin's Last Stand. Thorin's Last Stand is strictly better than Inspired Charge, unless your opponent Mindslavers you and then destroys your own artifact or enchantment with the second ability. But that's a bit of an edge case. Also, we'll recognize that Thorin's Last Stand, the second mode, that basically staples together 2 cards from Alpha, Disenchant, to 2/3 of a Healing Salve. So it's really interesting, like, how do you evaluate this kind of card? I'm going to approach it from 2 directions. I'm going to try to wrap my mind around the strength of mode 1. Then I'm going to wrap my mind around the strength of mode 2. And the strength of Thorin's Last Stand is going to be more than the sum of those pieces, because the optionality of choosing which one you want to do is something that you don't get with either of those constituents, right? So it should get, like, if you average how good an Inspired Charge is with how good a Disenchant plus a bit of a Healing Salve is, you're going to get something that's a little bit worse than being able to choose which one of those 2 you want to cast. All right. So we actually have surprisingly few options to choose from in terms of recent cards since we started getting 17 lands data that have this Disenchant and Gain Some Life ability. So Invoke the Divine is priced a little differently. It's 2 and a white for an instant. Destroy an artifact or enchantment, you gain 4 from Kaldheim. And boy, was this one bad. Total D-, not a relevant card. Now, I will say, and this is an important thing to note for Thorin's Last Stand, you could think that grading this for Premier Draft, remember, we're specifically predicting Premier Draft strength. You could think that misstates things a little bit, because this could be a sideboard card, right? You could want to bring it in to destroy an artifact or enchantment that's particularly good in game 2 and 3 of a traditional draft or Friday Night Magic draft. The thing I'll say about that is, though, and this gets out of the objective scale, but like, it looks a little bit weird in terms of a sideboard effect. Like, I have to take out my overrun effect in order to, or I have to put in an overrun effect in order to get a disenchant. The disenchant that I'm sideboarding in, if I don't want the overrun, is like super overpriced. It requires 2 generic and 2 white pips. Also, I don't know, like, overrun is kind of a win more card. It's for like when you're beating down and when you're the aggressor, and disenchant with life gain attached is like, the life gain's only going to be useful if you're not the aggressor, probably, or you're in a racing situation, in which case don't I probably just want to use the overrun. I don't know. The whole card like kind of makes no sense to me, to be honest. But okay, this is why we have an objective grading scale, or semi-objective. Okay, so let's get grading. So Inspired Charge, 2 and 2 white for an instant. Creatures you control get a +2/+1 until end of turn. This is a reprint of the M11 one, but it was in March of Machines. It had a D in March of Machines. They have been trying to tweak it a little bit because clearly it's not good enough on its own. So on the job, 2 and 2 white for an instant from MKM, it said creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. Investigate. So it's the same exact thing, except you get a clue at the end of it. So it kind of gives you a card back. This one was actually good. I mean, giving you the card back really does make it worthwhile. So that was a C+, because a big part of the con of this sort of a card is that it costs you an entire card. So the combat has to either like win you the game or get your opponent really low to where they have to start making bad decisions, or has to actually snap up net an entire creature, which is a big ask, especially when you're only pumping your toughnesses by 1. Okay. In Bloomburrow, they did something similar, 2 and 2 white for an instant. Creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. Some of you have heard this one before. But then if you control a rabbit, scry 2, very similar to the Investigate idea, but not quite similar enough. This one came in at a C-. I also took a look at an optional kind of card like this. So Goblin Surprise from Foundations is kind of similar. It's 2 and a white for, or 2 and a reds for an instant. Choose one. Either creatures you control get +2/+0 until end of turn, or make 2 1/1 goblins. The thing is, the make 2 1/1s is a much better escape hatch than destroy target artifact or enchantment. You're still not happy to be making 2 1/1s for 3 mana, but doing it at instant speed, 2 1/1s with flash for 3, it's not like horrible pricing. That said, it was still only a D+. Okay, and then one more thing that the second mode kind of reminded me of. You can tell me if you think this is like way out of whack, but Shattered Acolyte was a 2/2 for 1 and a white, lifelink, 1 to sacrifice it, destroy an artifact or enchantment. This is from Secrets of Strixhaven. So this card, you can kind of see what I'm thinking here. Gain 2 life is a lot worse than having a 2/2 lifelinker, obviously, but it's an idea of like a little bit of life gain, a little bit of destroying an artifact or enchantment, right? But obviously having the whole creature attached is a lot better. So this one was a C+. It was also it was just a generic white 2-drop in a set where white was really good and really aggressive. So that was kind of carried by the context. In rating this card, something popped into my mind that the limited resources guys have been talking about a lot recently, which is I listened to their Sunset show and they were talking about why they missed on Murdoch's Crusade. And basically they said like there's so much complicated stuff going on with this card. Murdoch's Crusade was from Marvel, the 1 and white for a sorcery. You can teamwork it and you exile a creature with toughness 4 or greater, or you exile an enchantment with mana value 4 or greater, and if you teamworked it, you do both. And they were saying like, maybe missing on this card was kind of avoidable because it looks like so many knobs have been tuned. It's all the numbers are so specific that it kind of feels like maybe it started lower and then they realized it was overpowered and then they had to tweak the numbers. And so they said like, to complete the thought, they said, we should in the future grade those cards a little bit higher because it's kind of a little fingerprint from R&D that like, oh, we really had to like kind of tune these knobs a little bit. And so maybe we should default to thinking those cards are actually like better than they look on the face of them. Thorin's Last Charge, I kind of think has a similar aspect to it. There's a lot of specific stuff going on there. Why is it gain 2 life, not 3 life? Why is it +2/+1? Why is it 2 and 2 white, not something else? So I kind of have that rattling around in my brain a little that like maybe this is one where they've been experimenting with this template a lot, as we've seen, from Inspired Charge to On the Job to Rabbit Response. So maybe there's something there that it's like a little better than it looks. But for the most part, I think it's probably a really weird and clunky sideboard card that's sort of fighting with itself in a few ways. So N equals 6, minimum C, maximum C+, median was D+ or C-. I don't like it. I'm going with D. I'm going to get killed by this card constantly now that I've said it. But in my Marvel breakdown yesterday, where I analyzed how well I graded in Marvel, I was grading too high. I have to pick my fights and grade some low. I do not like the looks of Thorin's Last Stand. So now that I've said that, guaranteed to be an A- level common, but I'm going with D. All right, 2 more commons to go, and then we're on to the uncommons. So the second last common is actually like really beautiful art. I love it a lot. Velvetwing Butterflies. So we're looking at a 2/2 for 2 and a white, flying, and then they brought back Adventure. Adventure is a little card within the card where you can play the adventure card instead from your hand. When you play it, you exile it, and then anytime after that, you get to play the creature from exile. And the adventure on this one is 1 and a white for an instant, tap 1 or 2 target creatures. So it's a 2-mana tap down 1 or 2 things stapled onto a Windrake, a 2/2 flying for 3. So here again, we have this like dual cards problem where we have to evaluate them both and then bump them up a little bit. Believe it or not, this is actually very close to a functional reprint of a card from Throne of Eldraine, right? So it's a 2/3 for 1 and 2 white flying, and it has an adventure on it, 1 and a white, tap up to 2 target creatures. This is called Ardent Veil Tactician. Just a few differences that I'll note in case you're thinking back to Kaldheim drafts 7 years ago. Throne of Eldraine draft 7 years ago, I mean. So it's a 2/3 instead of a 2/2. It does have actually like meaningfully quite worse mana requirements for limited. It's 1 and 2 white instead of Velvetwing Butterflies in the Hobbit, which is just 2 and a white. Why do I emphasize that? It means Ardent Veil Tactician, very often you're not going to be able to play it on turn 3. Say you're playing a blue-white deck and your opening hand is 2 islands and a plains, and then you don't draw a plains in the next 2 draws and you're on the play. You're not going to be able to play your Ardent Veil Tactician on 3. Velvetwing Butterflies, if you have just 1 plains, you will be able to play it on turn 3. So that actually is a difference that matters. So Velvetwing Butterflies is 1 toughness down, but it is actually easier to cast. So I actually would rather have the Velvetwing Butterflies, probably. All right, and then there actually is a very subtle difference between their adventures, not really relevant in limited, but Dizzying Swoop says tap up to 2 target creatures, whereas, and that's on Ardent Veil Tactician from Throne of Eldraine. Gaze and Wonder says tap 1 or 2 target creatures instead of up to 2. What does that mean? Ardent Veil Tactician, you could cast the adventure with no target creatures. So you could play it even if there's no creature out, if you needed an instant or sorcery cast trigger for whatever reason. I do not think this is relevant in the Hobbit, but if I don't mention it, everyone's going to be talking. It's all the comment section is going to be able to talk about. It's how I said they're the same, but there's actually a difference. Okay, so I did spot the difference. I joke with love. You pedants are why I do this, so thank you. Okay, and with all that said, Ardent Veil Tactician was a C. I really do think Velvetwing Butterflies is a little bit better. Unless 2-power flyers are super relevant in the format, I think the power of the flyer is more important than the toughness by a lot. And I guess, yeah, Ardent Veil Tactician, 2 Ardent Veil Tacticians would be a board stall. 2 Velvetwing Butterflies would kill each other off. So kind of same difference in the mirror match. So yeah, I would tend to say that Velvetwing Butterflies is like a little bit better than a C just based on this one card. But let's see what else we can cook up here. Secrets of Strixhaven had something that looks a lot like the instant adventure on the Velvetwing Butterflies. I'm talking about Rapier Wit, 1 and a white for an instant, tap target creature. If it's your turn, put a stun counter on it and draw a card. This is more similar than it looks on the face of it, because a 2-mana spell that draws you a card is kind of like a 2-mana spell that's attached to a creature. You see what I'm saying? When I play Gaze and Wonder, I lose. That's the adventure on Velvetwing Butterflies. So I play the adventure version. I lose a card in my hand because to play that adventure, I'm taking Velvetwing Butterflies out of my hand. I get the effect, and then I have Velvetwing Butterflies to cast instead. So if I had access to 6 cards before, I got to tap something, and now I have access to 6 cards after. Rapier Wit has the same overall effect on the situation. I take Rapier Wit out of my hand, going from 6 cards down to 5. I tap something down, Rapier Wit goes away, I draw a card, and now I'm back up to 6 cards, right? Gaze and Wonder, the instant on Velvetwing Butterflies, and Rapier Wit are both net 0 cost as a card, and they tap something down for 2 mana. So I actually think these are very directly comparable. And then Velvetwing Butterflies is kind of icing on the cake. I guess the question is, do you think Velvetwing Butterflies is likely to be better or worse than whatever you would tend to draw off of Rapier Wit? Or Do you think there are a bunch of situations where you just don't even want to play Gaze and Wonder? You want to run out your Velvetwing Butterflies, and those are situations where you would rather have the Velvetwing Butterflies in your deck than the Rapier Wit, and it's just functioning as a better card. So very subtle trade-off here, but you can see why it's an illustrative comparison. Rapier Wit was a C-. And again, I'm going to say Velvetwing Butterflies, in my view, it probably should get like a little bit of a boost above that. I would say it's like a little bit better than the C that we saw. It's a little bit better than the C- that we just saw. One other comparison that I have to make, Glamormite. From Lorwyn, this was a 2/2 flying for 3 in blue instead of in white. Flash and flying. When it enters, choose one, tap target creature, untap target creature. Glamormite has less optionality because you play it and you just do one thing. But it gets both effects all at once for 3 mana, kind of. I think Glamormite is actually better than Velvetwing Butterflies on paper. I'd probably rather have a 2/2 that does something on entry than the option of spending 5 mana total to do a slightly better version of the thing, right? And then the other thing, right? I'd rather have it all happen at once on entry, so I do prefer Glamormite. Also, Glamormite can untap a creature, so you can snap up a blocker, or untap a blocker to snap up an attacker. Glamormite got a D+ in Lorwyn, but that's really because the Fairies archetype did not exist, and you didn't really want Glamormites in your Merfolk deck or your Elementals deck that much. I will say I think it was better in Sealed. So that supports it being like individually a powerful card. Okay, so again, a pretty low score, but I'm like inclined to bump it up a little, to bump up Velvetwing Butterflies compared to this. Another similar one that I'll just talk about briefly, Marvel, giant size flying ant, 3 and a blue for a 3/2 flash flying. When it enters, choose one, tap an online permanent or untap an online permanent. Basically a slightly bigger Glamormite. This one got, that one got a C+ or thereabouts in 17 lands. I didn't even write it down because I don't really want to include it. It's more different from Velvetwing Butterflies. Also, it was lifted by Azorius being bonkers, the Azorius Flyers specifically being bonkers in Marvel, but just a point of comparison. And then finally, Durgar Island Dragon. This was another kind of similar-ish card from Tarkir Dragonstorm. 4/4 for 6, flying ward 2, but it had an omen, tap a creature, draw a card. But the omens are different from adventures. You actually shuffle it into your deck. So I actually don't think it's close enough for comparison. Very different stats. Omen is different from adventure, but wanted to call out, it might have come to your mind as well. Okay, so all told, I looked at 3 cards. The worst was a D+, the best was a C, the median was a C-. I'm actually kind of comfortable with C-. As much as I think Velvetwing Butterflies looks better on paper than Arden Vale Tactician, the most similar card, it's not that different. And I think, you know, 2/2 for 3 flying is not that good recently, and that's what this is going to be a lot of the time. So I think just falling back to how the default template performs kind of makes sense in this situation, because adventure is not that impactful. So I'm going to go with C-. If flyers, like tiny white flyers, are a big thing in the set, it could be better, but it's just like overcosted flyers that have not performed that well. So not super bullish on this one, going with the C-. The very last common, and then we're on to uncommons, Vow to Erebor. 1 and a white for an instant. Untap target creature you control. If it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If it's a dwarf, you may attach an equipment you control to it. So this is a very interesting combination of effects that we haven't seen quite like this before. So 1 and a white, untap a creature and it gets +2/+2. We've seen several variations on that. We haven't exactly seen one of those that puts an equipment on something at instant speed, but it is actually very similar to Resolute Strike. This one is from Zendikar Rising. I did not play that format, but apparently 1 white mana for an instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If it's a warrior, you may attach any equipment to it. And all the people sheltering in place in 2020 who were playing this on Arena, they were getting C level results out of it. But that is 1 cheaper than Vow to Erebor. However, it does not give you the untap part of Vow to Erebor. I don't know what the context of the set was, honestly. But that's one baseline. Okay, Riverguard's Reflexes was where my mind immediately went. This is worse card, strictly worse card. No, not quite strictly worse. There's one difference. Okay, so 1 and a white for an instant. This one's from Lorwyn Eclipsed. Target creature gets +2/+2. Untap it, and it gains first strike until end of turn. So gaining first strike versus attaching an equipment. This, you know, whether that's better or worse really depends on how the white equipment deck plays out in The Hobbit. If you often have extra equipment lying around unequipped to things and they're better than something gaining first strike, then Vow to Erebor will be better. Otherwise, it will be worse. However, hard to be worse in Riverguard's Reflexes, D+ level card, even in a set where Merfolk was like pretty good. Kithkin was good, and it was synergistic, certainly with Merfolk, maybe a little bit with Kithkin, but certainly with Merfolk. So I would consider that a pretty unfortunate data point for Vow to Erebor. Okay, it also reminds me of this genre of card that we've seen a few times in green as well. Combat tricks like buff something and untap it. So Pillar Launch and Avatar was similar. 1 green for an instant. Target creature gets +2/+2, untap it, and it gains reach. So instead of first strike, it's getting reach. It's also cheaper because pumping comes more naturally to green, I guess. That one was a C. And we have the same exact card that was a functional reprint of a card in March Machines called Arachnoid Adaptation. Same exact card, 1 in a green, instant, +2/+2, reach and untap. That one played out as a C+. Some of you are going to hate me for bringing this up, but actually Guac and Marshmallow Pizza from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This was 1 in a green for a food. So it has flash. So effectively an instant. It gives something +2/+2 when it enters, and you untap that creature. So another +2/+2 and untap combat trick. But then it's also a food, so you can 2-tap sack to gain 3. This was not where it was at in the Ninja Turtle set. That was a D+. And by the way, this was another small set, so it has that similarity with the Hobbit. So maybe we should weight this one a little bit more for that reason. I don't know. Okay, so we have just looked at 5 examples. The lowest score was a D+, which we saw a few times. Highest score was a C+, which we saw once. The median was a C. I do not typically think this kind of combat trick is very good. A +2/+2 for 2 is kind of like way under what you would want to get from that mana. Right, Giant Growth +3/+3 for 1 is not even that good in Limited. Most of the times that we see it, it's been pretty darn bad. It was like okay in Marvel, bad in Foundations, or maybe vice versa, bad in Marvel, okay in Foundations. Anyways, if I'm spending 2 mana on 2/2 of stats, I want it to be a creature that I'm getting out of it, not just a pump spell, you know? And the whole untap thing, it's kind of cute. You can untap a thingy and surprise them, but good players are going to play around this. In Lorwyn, if my opponent had 1 and a white up, I was never swinging my valuable rares into their tap down board because I'm aware that Riverguard's Reflexes is in the set. So you might get some people at pre-release with this one, but in terms of the long run chance of winning at this, with this at reasonably high ranks in Premier Draft on Arena, I would not be counting on the surprise factor. That said, there is the wild card of this instant speed equipment part of it. And the only time we ever saw that, it was the best version of it in the entire dataset. So for that reason, I don't actually know the context of the Zendikar Rising thing. I was doing other stuff during COVID, not playing Magic. And by other stuff, I mean mostly editing Wikipedia and sitting on my couch, but could have played Magic, didn't. Anyways, for that reason, because the most similar card is the highest in this range, it was the C+. That the most similar one was also the highest. I'm going to go C- instead of D+. I'm most tempted to go C+, or to go D+ rather, because 2 mana +2/+2 and untap has just been really bad. And even 1 mana +2/+2 and untap has been bad the few times that we saw it, for the most part. But because the most similar one is also the highest, I'll shade up a little bit and call it a C-. If the equipment deck is totally crushing, then hey, we might see this be like, oh, this is a B- card, you're re-equipping all your equipment all the time. I really don't think that's going to happen though. All right, time for uncommons, hooray. And the first uncommon is a doozy. All right, we have Bofur, Reliable Guardian, and there he is, beautifully guarding a pony, offering an apple to a hungry pony. When I read this book, I was so worried about the ponies. So good to see Bofur is on the case. Okay, so we have a 1/1 lifelink for 1. It's a dwarf scout. Then it has an adventure. Okay, so base case, 1/1 lifelink for 1 white. Okay, then we have an adventure. This is 1 and a white for an instant. Target artifact or creature you control gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So just save anything, basically. Honestly, 2 really good components in my view. So let's look at each one. First, I want to look at Concerted Care, the adventure part of this. So in Brothers War, we had this card, Loran's Escape. 1 white for an instant. Target artifact or creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So that's exactly the same ability as Concerted Care, the adventure on Bofur. But then also Loran's Escape has Scry 1. It's an instant for 1 mana instead of 2 mana, and it has Scry 1 as well. So 2 differences. It's 1 mana cheaper and you get to Scry, but then it also does not have a 1/1 lifelink attached to the end of it. Loren's Escape played out awesomely in Brothers War. It was a B-, just a fantastic protection spell. Another example, Tamiyo's Safekeeping, 1 green for an instant. This one said, target permanent you control gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, and you gain 2 life. That was from Neo. Tamiyo's Safekeeping, another fantastic card, was a B- as well. Another really good card that was pretty similar is Angelic Intervention. This was 1 and a white for an instant in March of Machines. 1 and a white for an instant, target creature or planeswalker you control gains protection from a color of your choice, and you can put a counter on it. But basically, protection from a color of your choice is really similar to Hexproof and Indestructible. But this one comes with an extra counter, but it doesn't have a 1/1 lifelink attached to it. That was a C+ in Mom. And then in Final Fantasy, it's also really similar to Restoration Magic, which was 1 mana for an instant, and then you can pay, as a base case, 1 mana for an instant, it gives something hexproof and indestructible. You can pay 1 extra to make it cost the same as Concerted Care, the adventure on Bomber, and you can make a permanent gain hexproof and indestructible, and you gain 3. And then if you pay 5 mana instead, you give all of your permanents hexproof and indestructible, and you gain 6. So Restoration Magic gives you a lot of stuff that Bomber doesn't give you, but again, no 1/1 attached. And that was a C+. Now let's approach this from the other direction, the 1/1 lifelink part of Bofur. Sorry, I said Bomber. I meant Bofur. My bad. My, no disrespect intended, sir. That was not a bit. Okay, so coming from the other direction on Bofur, you have Icor Drinker from March of Machines. I just want to look at some 1/1 lifelinks. So 1/1 for 1 lifelink. We actually haven't gotten 1/1 for 1 lifelink that much in recent sets, but this was one. So 1/1 for 1 black lifelink. For 1 black, exile it from your graveyard, incubate 2, which is a thing where you basically get a 2/2 for 3 eventually. So that was that was a really, really, really good version of 1/1 for 1 lifelink. That one was a solid B- as well in March of Machines. And then I was also thinking about Healer's Hawk, which is I think the best 1/1 for 1 lifelink that we've gotten recently that doesn't have like a whole other big extra thing attached. The big extra thing that Healer's Hawk has attached is it's a 1/1 for 1/1 for 1 white lifelink that also has flying. And there were some okay equipments as well in Foundations, and there are going to be plenty of equipments running around in this set. And Healer's Hawk was also a B-. I also want to, and everyone's going to groan when I do this, but I kind of want to compare it to Elite Interceptor, just in the sense, so Elite Interceptor was honestly a common that I was perfectly happy to pack 1, pick 1 in Secrets of Strixhaven. It was a 1/2 for 1. It enters prepared, and prepared here means 1 time you can cast 1 and a white, tap or untap target creature, draw a card. So people compared that to Thraben Inspector, which is the 1/2 for 1 that makes a clue when it enters, a very classic card. Bofur, I don't think is on that level, but I don't think it's that far off. So I'm not going to include Elite Interceptor in the average, but that was like a solid B or even almost B+ level common. And again, Bofur is a level below it, so we won't include it in the average. But overall, we saw 6 cards. The lowest that we saw was a C+, the highest was a B-, the median was a B-. And remember, we want to say that Bofur is a little bit probably better than its constituent parts, but each of the cards we looked at was also a better version of the constituent parts. Like Icor Drinker is a better 1/1 lifelink than Bofur because you get to exile it after and make it 2/2. Restoration Magic is a better protection spell than Concerted Care because you get to protect your whole board and gain life if you need to. But having said that, I think Bofur is going to be super solid. I'm coming in quite bullish on Bofur, partly because he's just going to wear equipment so well. A whole lot of the time, you might just want to play him out. It's a beautiful piece of design too. I love this card. I think a lot of the time you're going to want to play him out on 1 to wear your equipment, but also you are going to often want to just get the Concerted Care out of him. But at the same time, Concerted Care is kind of nice attached to a legendary creature, because if you have 2 Bofurs, you can use one of them as a 1/1 lifelinker that wears your equipment and the other one as Concerted Care, so it kind of lessens the pain of drawing 2 copies of the same 1-drop, which is part of what made Elite Interceptor so good. You have no problem drawing multiple of them or drawing it in the late game. So anyways, all that said, I'm bullish on Bofur. I'm not going to bump it all the way up to B to compete with Elite Interceptor, but I'm very comfortable with a B-. How would I be wrong? if the equipment deck is bad, Bofur is going to be bad with it, right? But if there's any white aggro in this set, Bofur is going to be part of it. A good part of it. That's my prediction, at least. Next up, Celebrate the Mountain King. 3 and a white for an enchantment. When this enchantment enters, for each opponent, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent that player controls until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. So classic Oblivion Ring effect in draft. It's just exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. And when this enchantment enters, recruit, which again, that's draw a card, then discard a card. If you discarded a non-land card, you make a 1/1 creature. Okay, so this is obviously it's a variant on Oblivion Ring. I won't bore you with the history of O-Ring, but this is actually a variant that we've seen before. I will just say Oblivion Ring is a card that you probably slightly over evaluate. Whenever I look at the most overdrafted cards in a set, by comparing when people pick cards in a pack to how often they actually win in draft, Oblivion Ring is one of the ones that often comes out on top. When it's stapled to a creature, it's weirdly often a lot better and more underdrafted. But I think people tend to overdraft 2 and a white, exile target non-land permanent until this enchantment leaves. Having said that, we have seen this before. 4 mana for an Oblivion Ring effect with a little something extra. So there are 2 dimensions to think about this card in. That's one way. The other way to think about this card is it's also kind of like the creatures that have an Oblivion Ring-like effect, because Celebrate the Mountain King makes a 1/1 on an entry. You could almost think of this as a Jailer type effect, a 1/1 for 4, exile target non-land permanent until this creature leaves play, except, of course, it's not when the 1/1 dies that they get their thing back. They have to kill Celebrate the Mountain King. The 1/1 is completely unrelated to that. So in a certain sense, it's almost like a better Jailer. However, it's super understated. It's a 1/1 for 4. Jailers are usually like a 3/3 for 3. Okay, so let's take through some examples of those. Static Net was like the best that this effect ever was. This was in Brothers War, 3 and a white for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until Static Net leaves the battlefield. So the same exact O-Ring effect, 4 mana O-Ring. The extra something that it gave you in exchange for being 1 mana more expensive than your classic O-Ring is that when Static Net enters, you gain 2 and make a tapped Power Stone, which was a land that could only pay abilities or cast artifacts. Anyways, this card was a straight up A-, like the mythic uncommon of the format. So Static Net, really good precedent for Celebrate the Mountain King. Also, what they give you, not that different. A 1/1 that can wear equipment versus gaining some life and ramping. I mean, you know, like maybe Static Net's a little better, but I don't think it's obviously much better. However, in Lorwyn, we got a worse version of Static Net. They definitely knocked it down a few pegs. It's the same exact thing as Static Net, except without the Power Stone. So 4 mana, 3 and a white for an enchantment. When it enters, you exile something, gain 2. That one got a C in Lorwyn. This is why I'm saying people often over-evaluate O-Ring. It really varies depending on the set. If the thing that I'm usually exiling costs less than 4 mana, then Liminal Hold is probably bad because I'm trading down on mana and they got to have it for a bit. Like maybe they got an Enters effect out of it. Maybe they got an attack out of it. So you're behind and trading down. If the things that you're trying to get rid of are bombs, they're super expensive, super impactful things, then O-Ring can be a lot better. Okay, I'm not going to directly compare Celebrate the Mountain King to Jailers. I wanted to put that thought out there into the ether, but I don't know how much that comparison holds. But this type of card, like a creature that when it enters, you get to exile a permanent you don't control, and then it gives that permanent or something else back when the creature dies. Kind of like, you know, we've never seen an O-Ring that makes a creature before. So this is somewhere between O-Ring and a Jailer. And this thing does card selection too. It's not just make a 1/1. It's like I put something in my hand, have to decide what to discard, and only if it's a non-land card do I get the 1/1. So all of that said, look, we looked at 2 cards, the 4 mana O-Rings that give you something extra. The minimum was C, the maximum was A-, the median was pick your choice of those 2. What do we make of this card? Honestly, I'm bullish. I like the idea of an Oblivion Ring that gives you card selection and maybe a creature, and even potentially virtual card advantage if you like discard that card we saw earlier with Flashback or something. I feel like this card could be really good. Having said that, Maybe I'm part of the problem because people always overdraft Oblivion Ring. I just want to say if this one ends up being a C-, I'm actually going to be very unsurprised. It's kind of a, like, it can be great or terrible kind of a card. Well, great or completely mediocre kind of a card, actually. If it's below a C or a C-, I would be very surprised. As soon as it came out of my mouth, I regretted it and kind of wanted to shift to a B-. But I'm going to stick to my guns. Let's try to say something interesting here. Let's say B. Okay, next up, we have Daín, Lord of the Iron Hills. Is it Daín? Proper Tolkien fans, let me know. Okay, it's a 2/2 for 1 and a white, Vigilance, storied, which again, if you control 3 or more artifacts, so legendaries and or sagas, that gets you an enduring story. And as long as you have an enduring story, creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. A propaganda style effect for my fellow old people. So this is a very unusual combination of things. It's a very, very novel card, almost unique in the things that it puts together. Being a creature that conditionally unlocks a mini propaganda, that is a kind of thing that we rarely see. I mean, I like that it's a 2/2 Vigilance right off the bat, and then it has this extra thing. 2/2 Vigilance is not great, but it's not like you're paying that much to put it in your deck. There actually is one card that we have seen in a semi-recent set in Throne of Eldraine that does put some of these elements together. So this was Archon of Absolution, a 3/2 for 3 and a white flying, pro-white. Creatures can attack you or a planeswalker you control unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. This one played out as a C in Eldraine. And I don't really want to argue with that. It's such a novel type of card, and I could see it going really well. I could see it going really badly. I'm just happy to say we have an N of 1, max min median of C, and a verdict. It's like maybe slightly better. It's maybe slightly better than the 3/2 flying for 4, so I'll bump it up a tiny bit. But honestly, who knows? Next up, Eagle of the Great Shelf, a 2/5 for 4 and a white, flying. Whenever this creature attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each other creature you control. I was thrilled to see that they printed this card. I was thrilled. I was overjoyed, and let me tell you why. One of my most hated designs from the last few years, maybe my most hated design, is this card that they kind of printed twice, Team Avatar. The important part of this card is 2 and a white for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. The thing I hate about this design is that there are many, many, many games I've played where my opponent certainly could have killed me if they had done an Alpha Strike. And under normal circumstances, they would have just attacked me with everything. But because I had out a Team Avatar, they could also win by just attacking one at a time, one at a time, one at a time. And that was actually the strategic thing to do because it's more risk averse and probably just as likely to win. And so it incentivizes a style of play where you're just miserably losing for the better part of like half an hour as you just chump block over and over and over and over again until they finally deplete your resources and kill you. But maybe you have like one out, so you don't want to concede. So you're just sitting there losing forever. So that was not even that good in Avatar. It was a C-. It also had this like discard and deal damage equal to the number of creatures to a creature kind of, release valve to use it as a removal spell instead. And even then it was only a C-. Enchantment is probably on its own usually worse than a creature because it doesn't directly affect the board. But Team Avatar immediately has an effect on the board if you play it first main and then go to combat. Then they kind of reprinted it. So they printed Thoughtweft Imbuer, a 0/5 for 3 and a white, Kithkin in Lorwyn. Whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gets +X/+X, where X is the number of Kithkin. So then all over again, I was sitting there chumping the stupid creatures that this thing was throwing at me endlessly for half an hour. Hated this design. This one was a B-, so it's actually a great thing to be doing, a good pack one, pick one in Lorwyn. Eagle really gets around those design problems because it's just one creature that's attacking you. And the thing that really appeals to me about that is you're going to die fast. This thing just goes in the air. You either can deal with it and you're okay, or it'll just kill you in a hurry. It doesn't have this issue where you kill one thing, but their Team Avatar is still there. So they just start attacking you with the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And the play pattern just continues forever. There's a lot less inevitability to it. It's also more expensive. A 5-drop that doesn't immediately have an enters effect or have any kind of protection. A lot of the time, it's just going to eat Celebrate the Mountain King, the Oblivion Ring variant, or the deal 5 damage to a creature or something. So I feel a lot better about this card. Having said that, it's much worse, right? I think it's much worse certainly than Thoughtweft Imbuer, and also probably worse than Team Avatar. So we've seen 2 cards. The worst was a C-, the best was a B-. Either one's a median. Where would I put this? I'm going to just say probably similar to Team Avatar. I'm not going to put it in the D category. I wouldn't be shocked if it gets there if the removal or bounce or whatever is efficient enough. The number of 5 drops that you want that aren't like proper bombs is very, kind of minimal in any limited set. This thing does wear equipment well, though. But it also maybe doesn't even really need equipment. It can probably just kill you on its own. So I might be eating my words if there's an awesome white go wide strategy. That's kind of why I'm fudging it up to C-. Just in a vacuum as a card, I'm inclined to put it closer to the D type of range. Like, yes, it's technically kind of more than a 2/5 for 5 because you usually are going to want to be attacking with it. And when you're attacking, hopefully it's at least getting like +3/+3 or something. But at the same time, that requires support of a board where you might already be in a winning position. And the floor on this card is you play a 2/5 for 5 and don't have other creatures when you're on the back foot and you have to try blocking with it, or it gets stuck in your hand because 5 mana is just too much for you to afford, especially when you're trying to like re-equip and move stuff around. So I'm landing around like C-. Next up, Iron Hills Blacksmith, a 1/1 for 1 and a white double strike. When it enters, make a colorless equipment artifact token named Axe with equipped creature gets +1/+0 and equip 2. So we've seen some cards that when they enter make an equipment token, but usually these are rares that make like a really powerful equipment, or mythics that make a super powerful equipment. This is like playing around with having equipment generation on an otherwise not that impressive creature, just a 1/1 for 2 double strike, and the equipment's like the smallest equipment you could possibly have, just +1/+0. So we have to think a little bit originally here. The first thing that this reminded me of was Giot, King of the Dwarves from Final Fantasy, a 1/1 for a red and a white double strike. When Giot or another dwarf you control enters, and whenever an equipment you control enters, you can pilfer, discard, and draw. Obviously, these are pretty different cards, but you can see why I'm thinking about the comparison, like a 1/1 for 2 double strike in the equipment deck. So I think that's like a fair baseline for including this in the average, and Giot was a C+ in a very balanced format. The other card it immediately reminded me of was Quill Blade Laureate from Secrets of Strixhaven, a 1/1 for 1 and a white double strike. There you go. It enters prepared, and the prepared ability is a sorcery for 2 that says target creature gets +1/+0 and gains double strike. Not that different from an equipment that gives something +1/+0. I mean, giving the thing double strike is very different, but hey, you can reuse the equipment. The equipment sticks around. So again, you can see why I thought that's a pretty good basis for comparison. And that was also a C+. In that said, though, it was probably boosted by white aggro just being really good. But anyways, looking at 2 cards, we saw 2 cards with C+s each all around. And I'm comfortable with that for Iron Hills Blacksmith. 1/1 for 2 double strike is a probably appropriate cost, and it's just a 2 for 1 inherently. So I would have trouble seeing it be too bad. All right, my friends, 3 cards to go. So Lake Town Toymaker is a 3/4 for 3 and a white. Wow, we're seeing a lot of these 3/4s for 4. Human Artificer. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you've drawn 2 or more cards this turn, another target creature you control gets +3/+0 and gains first strike. Several unusual features of this card. So first of all, 3/4 for 4 is already a bit of a weird and unusual stat line. Second, white creatures that trigger off of drawing 2 or more is very unusual, and we have not seen that in the whole rest of the white card file for the commons and uncommons, at least in the Hobbit. And then also, we've never seen, as far as I could find, we've never seen a creature that gives another creature +3/+0 in first strike on combat, or even either of those pieces. I don't think we've ever seen one that gives it like, or anything close to it. It's like pretty rare to find even close analogs like +2/+0 in first strike, or just +3/+0 on its own. So a lot of original thinking happening in the design of this card, which is cool, but it makes comparisons difficult. So the first thing that came to mind was Stalwarts of Osgiliath from Lord of the Rings. This is another of those cases where they seem to have taken inspiration from the design of Lord of the Rings to come up with this card. Stalwarts of Osgiliath was 4/3 for 4 and a white. When Stalwarts of Osgiliath enter, the ring tempts you. When you draw your second card each turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on Stalwarts of Osgiliath. Now, ring tempting on turn 5 is not the most relevant thing ever. You really want to start kicking off your ring tempting a lot earlier than that. So I think that part is not super relevant. And the draw your second card part is worse. Putting a counter on this creature is like way worse than giving something +3/+0 in first strike. This stat line's a little better. I probably usually rather, in especially white, have a 4/3 for 5. Sorry, I'd usually rather have a 4/3 than a 3/4, but a 4/3 for 5 is worse than a 3/4 for 4. So all this to say, Stalwarts of Osgiliath, I think, is like substantially worse than Lake Town Toymaker, and it was a C in Lord of the Rings. That said, I really couldn't find a lot of support for Lake Town Toymaker. I know this is like a crossover card that's supposed to like play in multiple archetypes. And also Recruit goes like, that's like the main enabler for it. But it's kind of weird that it's the only payoff that I've seen for drawing 2 or more cards, at least at uncommon or uncommon. Maybe there are more at rare. So I kind of want to dock a little bit for that. It's not like you can put together a whole deck, as far as I can tell, in white, where this is the game plan. So I'm going to go with n=1, C's all around to the one card that we looked at, because I really couldn't find analogs that I was very satisfied with other than Stalwarts of Osgiliath. And I'm going to just predict a C. With that said, maybe tomorrow we'll look at the payoffs in blue and we'll be like, wow, these are like so bonkers. And I really want to build a Recruit blue-eyed humans draw 2 deck, and Lake Town Toymaker is going to be an amazing part of it. I don't know, maybe it should be a C-. Whatever, we'll see. Okay, one that should definitely not be a C-, Stone by Sunlight. 1 and a white for an instant. Choose 1. Destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. Or until end of turn, target creature becomes an artifact in addition to its other types and gains indestructible. Not quite following the flavor here, because I feel like by making these trolls turn to stone, Gandalf did both of these things, destroyed creatures of power 4 or greater and made them into indestructible artifacts, but I guess that would have been a little bit too powerful. Okay, so immediately, of course, this makes me think of Murdoch's Crusade. Maybe not a fair comparison, but we just saw a 1 and a white kill something. This was exile with toughness 4 or greater instead of destroy with power 4 or greater, but close enough, like kill a big thing in white for 2 mana. That one was or you get to exile an enchantment, which is way more niche than making something indestructible. So Stone by Sunlight has a lower power ceiling, but more common applications for its non-removal ability, okay? And it's an instant too. And Murdoch's Crusade surprised everybody by being a B. It also reminds me of Final Fantasy, where we had battle menu, 1 and a white for an instant. You could choose 1, make it 2/2, give something +0/+4, so also a protection ability, destroy target creature with power 4 or greater, or gain 2. The vast majority of the time, you were hoping to destroy target creature with power 4 or greater, but it was nice to have these other release valves. Usually make it 2/2 was the release valve on battle menu, but again, you were like always trying to just destroy something with power 4 or greater, so functionally the same card, because I think that's going to be true for Stone by Sunlight as well. Wow, hard card names to close this marathon video with. All right, battle menu was a B-. Kind of reminds me of Rally the Monastery from Tarkir Dragonstorm. This was 3 and a white for an instant, but if you cast another spell this turn, it costs 2 less. So it was often 1 and a white, just like Stone by Sunlight for an instant. Choose 1, make 2 1/1 monks with prowess. Okay, that's a pretty good release valve. Up to 2 creatures get +2/+2 until end of turn. Or destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. Okay, so I would say like probably a little better than Stone by Sunlight, but not too different. That one was also a B. So taking all of these together, we looked at 3 kind of comparable cards. The lowest was B-, the highest was B, the median was B. Honestly, I'm comfortable with B. It totally depends on how good white is. But honestly, compare this to the Oblivion Ring. It's only 2 mana. It'll destroy most of the things that you care about, and it has this flexible other mode. Maybe I overrated that Oblivion Ring. Okay, folks, last card. If you're here, thank you so much for sticking with me. Make sure to tune in tomorrow for the rating of blues, commons, and uncommons. But here we have the Mountain King's Returns. 2 and a white. Recruit. This is a saga. Level 1 is Recruit, so you immediately draw a card, then discard a card. If you discarded a non-land card, you make a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So 3 mana, you immediately probably get a 1/1 and shape your hand a little, although maybe you have to discard something that you care about. If you do though, here's a nice level 2 for you. Return a creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So the way that this is going to play out is turn 3, not turn 1, I play this and make a 1/1. Then turn 4, the card that I discard to make a 1/1, I'm going to make sure it's a creature card with mana value 3 or less. Then turn 4, when it ticks up, I get to return that thing that I just discarded to make the 1/1 to the battlefield. And then turn 5, I get an extra +1/+1 counter for my trouble. So instead of spending the mana on a 3-drop, I get to make a 1/1, get that 3-drop anyways, and then also get a counter out of it. And I basically draw this card back because I discarded the 3-drop only after drawing another card, right? So this card kind of replaces itself after all of that. So I'm liking the looks of this, but let's see some comparison points. The first thing that I want to kind of get out of the way is sorceries that bring things back have often been pretty bad. One close comparison might be Scout for Survivors from Edge of Eternity's 2 and a white for a sorcery. Bring 3 creatures with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a +1 counter on each of them. This card was a straight up D, and it's really because it gets stuck in your hand. You can't curve out with it. You can't use it on turn 3. You're waiting, and then by the time you use it, like, you really have to double spell to make it worth your while. Basically, the Mountain King's Return solves all of those problems by being something that you're very happy to run out a lot of the time on 3. I would actually think of it more like something like Voracious Vermin. This was from Wild's Veldrain, 2/1 for 2 and a black. When it enters the battlefield, make a 1/1 rat that can't block. When another creature you control dies, you put a counter on Voracious Vermin. This is like a similar card in a few different ways, right? You could think of Mountain King's Return as like it's a 3-drop with a 1/1 attached and a +1/+1 counter. And maybe that's it. Like, that's kind of what Voracious Vermin is. So I think this might be a good comparison, even though they look really different. Voracious Vermin was a C+ in Wilds of Eldraine. And then I was also thinking of Welcome to Sweet Tooth, also from Wilds of Eldraine. 1 and a green for a Saga. On 1, you make a 1/1. On 2, you make a food. And then on 3, you put some +1/+1 counters. That one was a straight up B+, but there was tons of stuff to do with food. I think that was an outlier. It just gave you tons of resources for synergies. Similarly, 3 blind mice. If you were in the standard queues around these days with all the token making decks, then this might trigger you a little, but Wilds of Eldraine Saga as well. It was 2 and a white. On 1, you make a 1/1. On 2 and 3, you copy a token you control. And then on 4, all of your creatures get +1/+1 and gain vigilance. That one was a straight up B-. Again, I think it was better than Mountain King's Return, probably. Maybe a closer comparison is Origin of the Avengers from Marvel. This was 1 and a white. On 1, you scry 2. On 2, you can put a hero with mana value 3 or less from your hand onto the battlefield, and if you don't draw a card. And then on 3, you put a counter on your whole team. Kind of a similar sort of a thing, like the thing that you do on the first tick sets you up to make sure that you're putting in a 3-drop on the second tick, and then you get some counters. This one, though, it gives me pause. It was only a C+. I definitely thought this was going to be better than that, and I'm still not totally sure. I didn't get to play with or against it enough to really have a clear theory of why it was only a C+ when white was so dominant in the format, and heroes specifically. So that definitely makes me a little bit less bullish on Mountain King's Return, because I actually think maybe Origin of the Avengers is the best comparison out of all of these. But okay, we looked at 3 cards. The lowest was a D, the highest was a B, the median was a C+. I was thinking about C+. I'm going to go into this thinking Mountain King's Return is probably quite good. I'm going to try playing this card. Now, it is clunky. Anything that has to do with like requiring you to have a 3-drop that you can bring back, that's always going to be clunky in the same way as Scout for Survivors. So if you whiff on this, if you don't have a 3-drop, it's really bad. Also, if it interrupts your play pattern, like I have a 2/2 and I have to decide whether to play it on 2 or hold it for 3 to discard it to Mountain King's Return and then get it back for free on turn 4, that's like really awkward, right? So, you know, all in all, maybe I should be saying C+, but I think I'm just going to go with B- on this one. Whew, I'm exhausted. If you're not subscribed, come on. How much more work can I do for you? Okay, I'm obviously kidding, but tomorrow I'm going to come back with a full review of blue commons and uncommons. So see you then. Until tomorrow, have tons of fun playing Magic, and don't be afraid to splash.